He was the king who had everything: power, riches, a name carved into history. And yet he destroyed everyone who got close to him. 6 wives, 2 beheaded, 1 abandoned, 1 who died in childbirth, 1 who barely escaped with her life, and only 1 who outlived him. What kind of man does that? Was he a monster? Because his son Henry VIII is stepping onto the throne, 17 years old, tall, a legacy stained with pressure, doubt, and impossible expectations. Handsome, his older brother Arthur was the original heir. But Arthur died of illness just months after marrying the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon. Educated, athletic, the people call him their golden prince, or just a man desperate for love, legacy, and control. This is the story of Henry VIII, the king who broke his own heart chasing a crown that never fit. It is the year 1509. England is quiet, mourning the death of King Henry VII. But beneath the sadness, there's hope. 10 years older than Henry, but elegant beyond her years, he admired her. He's everything a king should be. But what no one sees, what no one dares to whisper, is that the boy king carries more than a crown. He carries a shadow. A boy who died within days. A daughter who didn't survive infancy. You see, Henry wasn't meant to rule. And then the question hung in the air. What now? To keep peace with Spain, to maintain the alliance, a solution was proposed, strange even to royal ears. Henry, the younger brother, would marry Catherine, his brother's widow. Henry believed, though, he knew that his legacy depended on a male heir. He was just a child when this idea was first suggested, and Henry, still in his prime, began to feel trapped. Years passed, he turned 17, his father died, and almost immediately he married her. Some said it was a match made by politics. Others believed it was love. Catherine was graceful, wise, and deeply religious. For a while they were happy. Dark hair, clever eyes, a voice that could sting like a whip or soothe like a lullaby. She wasn't a beauty in the traditional sense, but she was dangerous. Henry wasn't just a king, he was a romantic. He wrote poetry, he jousted with knights, he played music. But he also knew his duty, to secure the Tudor bloodline. That meant one thing: he needed a son. Catherine became pregnant again and again. The gods were cruel, a stillbirth. Each loss broke something inside them. Henry petitioned the Pope, arguing that his marriage to Catherine had been unnatural in the eyes of God. He quoted scripture. He sent lawyers to Rome, wrote letters soaked in longing. But Anne had one demand. She would not be his mistress. Then finally, a child lived. A girl. Mary. Henry loved her, but it wasn't enough. England had never had a ruling queen. A woman on the throne was seen as weakness. Catherine was nearing 40, her beauty fading. Her body worn from pregnancies and grief. Old friends became enemies. Even his most trusted advisor, Sir Thomas More, would not support him, and would later pay the price with his life. Was this marriage cursed? Was God punishing him for marrying his brother's wife? His guilt turned into distance, then coldness, and then contempt. Catherine, once his queen, became a symbol of failure. Then everything changed. Anne Boleyn entered court like a spark in dry grass. Anne wasn't like the others. She didn't swoon for the king. She played the game differently. She said no. Henry was obsessed. He showered her with gifts, if he wanted her. She had to be queen. And Henry, who had moved kingdoms for less, was ready to risk everything. There was just one problem. He was still married, and the Catholic Church would not allow divorce without a very good reason. But the Pope refused. Catherine, after all, was the aunt of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. Politically, it was impossible. So Henry made a choice that shocked the world. In his mind, if the Pope wouldn't grant him freedom, he'd take it for himself. Henry denounced the Pope's authority, broke from the Catholic Church, created the Church of England, and declared himself its supreme head. It was more than a religious shift. It was a national earthquake. Monasteries were dissolved, priests arrested. But to Henry, it was all worth it. Because in 1533, after 7 long years of waiting, he finally married Anne Boleyn. Catherine was stripped of her title, banished from court. Her daughter Mary was declared illegitimate. Anne was crowned Queen of England in a lavish ceremony, but the people were silent. Some called her a witch, others feared her. But Henry saw only the future, and that future would be a son. Anne became pregnant. Henry was ecstatic. He believed with all his heart that this child would be the boy he had longed for, but fate wasn't finished mocking him. Henry tried to smile for the court, but his fury boiled beneath the surface. Anne had promised him a son, and this was failure. Still, he tried to be patient. Anne became pregnant again, but miscarried. Then again, another loss. Whispers started. Was she cursed too? Henry once again began to look away from his wife, toward the shadows, toward the next possibility. Anne, who had played her cards so perfectly, was now in danger. She just didn't know it yet. The court had grown colder. What once felt like a romantic rebellion now felt like a tightening noose. Anne Boleyn, the woman for whom Henry had split from the Catholic Church, now walked the halls of the palace with restless eyes. The people didn't love her. The nobles didn't trust her. And worst of all, Henry was drifting. The eyes of her enemies were everywhere. Whispers in corners. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Jane Seymour, her lady-in-waiting, was now catching Henry's gaze. She was everything Anne wasn't. Quiet, obedient, soft. The king started spending more time with Jane, and Anne noticed. She had given him a daughter when he wanted a son. She had lost pregnancies, and Henry, who once waited years to marry her, had begun to treat her with cold indifference. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about legacy, about pride, about control. And Anne's grip on all three was slipping. She knew she was being watched. But Anne was not one to surrender quietly. She argued with Henry, challenged him, refused to play the submissive queen. The kind of accusations that, true or not, were enough to destroy a queen. And for that, she was called arrogant, dangerous, treacherous. She wept, prayed, begged God to show mercy on her daughter Elizabeth. She denied every accusation, but she knew the truth. The crown she wore was never secure. It was borrowed on now. It would be taken back. And Anne's enemies, led by the calculating Thomas Cromwell, began to circle. The evidence thin, the testimonies questionable. But it didn't matter. The verdict was decided long before the trial began. Her hair pinned beneath a linen coif. A French executioner was brought in, his sword quicker than an axe. Even in death, Henry wanted the appearance of mercy. Even her sharp wit became a weapon turned against her. She spoke of God with humility, and then the blade fell. Just days after Anne's arrest, he was already planning the wedding. The very fire that once drew Henry to her was now burning her alive. Then it happened. Anne miscarried again, this time. A boy. Henry's patience ended. He saw it as a sign. God was angry. He had made another mistake. But Henry didn't mourn. He had what he wanted. A fresh start. Gentlewoman. A new queen. It didn't take long for rumors to take root. Whispers of adultery, of incest, of treason. He visited her often, prayed, crossed his fingers. This time he begged God for success. Anne was arrested in 1536, dragged from her chambers, accused of seducing 5 men, including her own brother, his heir. She accepted the divorce, stayed in England, and was given a generous allowance. She became known as the king's sister, the only wife who left with her head intact. He hadn't met her before the arrangement, only seen a painting. And Henry, now overweight and plagued with leg ulcers, felt young again in her presence. He dressed in mourning for months. He wore black, shut himself away. And deep down, perhaps for the first time, he felt regret. His legacy, the entire kingdom celebrated. Bells rang, cried, screamed, said she was too young to die, lovers from her past. Even while queen, she grew careless. Letters were exchanged, rendezvous arranged, and eventually she was caught. Banquets filled with joy and wine stretched for days. 2 executed, 1 dead, 2 disgraced, 1 divorced. Henry's dream had come true. Henry had already moved on. As Anne sat imprisoned in the Tower of London, Henry was preparing to marry Jane Seymour. Anne, once proud and defiant, broke down in the Tower. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked to the scaffold. She wore a grey gown and a cloak of crimson. Anne knelt, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. She spoke of the king with respect. Just like that, the second queen was gone. The next day, Henry became engaged to Jane Seymour. 10 days later, they were married. The people were stunned by the speed of it all. Jane quickly became pregnant. Henry was hopeful, cautious, terrified. In October 1537, Jane gave birth. A boy. Edward. At last Henry had his son. Dreams come with a price. Jane Seymour died 2 weeks later from complications of childbirth. Henry was devastated. The only wife who gave him a son was the one he barely had time to love. But he was still a king, and a king needs a queen. Years passed. Advisors urged him to remarry. Political alliances needed to be made. Henry eventually agreed to marry Anne of Cleves, a German princess. But when she arrived in England, he was horrified. He called her unattractive, said she looked like a Flanders mare. The marriage was awkward, cold, and unconsummated. Within 6 months, he had it annulled. Anne wisely didn't fight. And so, the search began again. This time it was a teenager. Catherine Howard, just 19, beautiful, flirtatious, full of life. He married her in 1540, but Catherine had secrets, affairs. The same accusations that once destroyed Anne Boleyn returned this time with stronger evidence. Catherine was arrested. She begged Henry for mercy. But Henry, now cold and worn by betrayal, showed no mercy. In 1542, Catherine was beheaded. She was barely out of her teens. And so the blood continued to flow through Henry's marriages. 5 queens gone. And still, the king was not done. The year was 1543. Henry VIII was no longer the young golden-haired prince England had once adored. He was aging, bloated, and crippled by disease. His once powerful legs were swollen with ulcers, his mood blackened by years of betrayal, grief, and disappointment. The charm had faded. In its place stood a paranoid, angry, and broken man. But even now, with his body failing him, Henry wanted control of his court, of his enemies, of his legacy. Catherine had been married twice before, both times widowed, and she had no desire to be a queen. But she had a quiet strength, a grace, and unlike the others, she knew exactly how to survive a dangerous man. And he still wanted a wife. He found her in a widow named Catherine Parr. She was intelligent, calm, and patient. Not beautiful in the way his younger wives had been, but wise, something Henry now needed more than youth. She flattered him, obeyed him in public, but behind closed doors, she carefully navigated his rages and moods. She read to him when his legs hurt too much to move. She was brave, but brave women had not fared well around Henry. She cared for his children, especially young Edward and Princess Elizabeth, that he was her teacher, her guide, her king. Henry, soothed by her submission, tore up the warrant. His ulcers worsened. He could no longer walk without pain. His moods became unbearable. Even his most loyal advisors feared speaking against him. The once mighty king who had danced, jousted, and written poetry now spent his days in bed, cursing the air. But Henry began to reflect on his life, the wives he had discarded, the friends he had executed, the blood he had spilled in the name of power. He began to plan his legacy. She brought the broken royal family closer together. For a moment, the Tudor court felt like a home again. The same whispers that had once led Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard to the scaffold now pointed at her. She became Henry's sixth wife in July 1543. It didn't make them legitimate again, but it did mean they could become queens. Should Edward die without heirs? From the very start, Catherine Parr played a different game. She wasn't trying to win Henry's heart, she was trying to keep her own head. But Catherine had a secret passion religion. She was sympathetic to the Protestant reforms sweeping across Europe. And at a time when heresy could still cost a person their life, she read forbidden books and hosted private debates. When Henry found out, he was furious. She held his hand, prayed quietly, and stayed until the end, not out of love, not out of fear, but because she understood him. He had executed friends, advisors, wives. He had married 6 times. He had left behind a son of just 9 years old, and a kingdom divided by faith, fear, and uncertainty. More than anyone else ever had. A visionary, a man ruled by desire, or simply a broken soul chasing immortality. An arrest warrant was quietly drawn. Her enemies whispered to the king that she was trying to undermine his authority, trying to push Protestantism too far. But Catherine was smart. Before the arrest could happen, she humbled herself before Henry, claimed she only debated religion to learn from him. Catherine Parr had done what no other queen could. She had survived the storm. She would outlive Henry. Meanwhile, Henry's body was failing fast. But in those final years, something changed. Who redefined religion, who created and destroyed queens with a word, who shattered his nation to feed his pride, and still couldn't escape death. Perhaps it was regret. Perhaps it was fear. He had one surviving son, Edward, and 2 daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. Years ago, he had declared both girls illegitimate. But now, perhaps knowing death was near, he restored them to the line of succession. It was a rare moment of clarity, a final attempt to hold together the very legacy he had nearly destroyed. On January 28, 1547, Henry VIII died. He was 55 years old. At his side was not a passionate lover or a scheming mistress, but Catherine Parr, the last wife, the survivor. Henry's reign had lasted 38 years. He had changed the religious landscape of England forever, split from the Catholic Church, and dissolved the monasteries. But he had also fathered a future queen, Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the wife he had murdered. She would one day become England's greatest monarch. In death, Henry left behind more questions than answers. Was he a tyrant? What is clear is this: Henry VIII was not just a king. He was a storm, a force that reshaped England with every choice he made. And in the end, all the power, all the crowns, all the wives could not save him from the one thing he feared most: being forgotten. But history remembered. It remembered the man who killed for love. It remembered the king who looked to the heavens and thought himself God. His chosen Anne then spent his last years haunted by his own choices. Henry VIII wanted to be remembered as a warrior, a builder of dynasties, the father of kings. Instead, he is remembered as the king who killed his wives. And that, perhaps, is the most tragic part of all. Because behind the blood, behind the executions, behind the screaming silence of the tower walls, was a man who, in the end, wanted what we all want: to be loved, to be remembered, to matter. Even if it meant burning the world to ashes, just to leave his name behind.